The last box I ever packed in that bakery smelled like burnt sugar and cold November air. I remember standing in the middle of what used to be my kitchen, the one I'd built from nothing, and thinking, 23 years. 23 years of getting up at 4 in the morning, of flour under my fingernails, of learning that a proofing dough can tell you what kind of day you're going to have before the sun even rises. And now I was supposed to hand the keys to a woman I barely knew and walk out like none of it had ever mattered. I was 31 years old when I opened Cedar and Honey. People told me I was too young. My mother told me I was too young. My landlord, Mr. Aldridge, a stout man with a grey mustache, who smelled permanently of pipe tobacco, he took one look at me across his desk in 2001 and said, "You sure about this, young lady? Bread doesn't pay the bills the way you think it does." I signed the lease anyway. The space was on the corner of Millbrook Avenue and 4th, in a part of Guelph, Ontario that wasn't quite charming yet, but wasn't quite forgotten either. It had old hardwood floors that creaked in the same 3 spots no matter which way you walked, a front window that let in slanted afternoon light in a way I'd never seen anywhere else, and a back kitchen just big enough for 2 people to work without bumping into each other constantly, though we usually did anyway. I had $4,000 in savings. I had a notebook full of recipes I'd been collecting since I was 16, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. The first winter was brutal, not in a poetic way. In the very literal way that the boiler broke in January, I couldn't afford to fix it properly, and I wore my coat inside for 6 weeks while I baked because at least the oven kept the back room warm. Some mornings I opened the till and counted out $12.50 and told myself it was enough. It wasn't enough, but I kept the lights on and I kept the door unlocked and I put a little chalkboard sign out front that said, "Fresh bread. Made here. Come in." That's how I met them. It was February 2002. A Tuesday, I remember because I always made extra sourdough on Tuesdays, and the smell would drift halfway down the block when the wind was right. I was wiping down the front counter when I heard the bell above the door and looked up to see 2 kids standing on my mat. Brothers, I thought immediately, because they had the same way of holding their shoulders slightly forward, like they were braced for something. The older one looked about 13. The younger one, maybe 10. Both of them thin in that particular way that isn't about being small. They stood there for a moment, just looking at the display case. "Can I help you?" Reached into his jacket pocket and put 3 loonies on the counter. Carefully, like they'd been counted out already. "How much is a loaf?" he said. Not rude, just direct. The way kids are when they've learned not to waste words. I looked at the coins. I looked at him. I looked at the younger one, who was staring at the cinnamon rolls like he was memorizing them. "Sit down," I said. "We just want to know the price." "I heard you. Sit down." I don't know why I said it like that. It just came out. Maybe it was the coats. Both of them too thin for February in Ontario. Maybe it was the careful way he'd laid out those 3 coins. Maybe it was something in the younger one's face when he looked away from the cinnamon rolls, like he'd already accepted that he wasn't going to get one. I put 2 bowls of soup on the table, tomato. From a pot I kept going most of the winter. 2 cinnamon rolls, 2 glasses of milk, and I put their 3 loonies in a little dish on the side and said, "You can leave those if you want. Doesn't matter to me either way." The older one looked at me for a long moment. He had dark eyes, very steady. Then he sat down. They ate without speaking. Not the way people eat when they're shy, but the way people eat when they're genuinely hungry and they know this might be the best thing they're going to get today. I went back to my counter and pretended to do paperwork. Before they left, the older one came up to the counter. He put the 3 loonies in front of me again. "We'll pay you back," he said, "both of us. We're going to pay you back everything." I pushed the coins back toward him. "Buy yourselves bus tickets home," I said, scolded. He took the coins. He nodded once, very serious, like we'd made a deal. I didn't know his name. I didn't ask. I didn't think I'd see him again. But he came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that. Sometimes the younger one was with him, sometimes not. I learned slowly, through small exchanges, that their names were that they went by their middle names because their mother preferred it, that they were staying in a rooming house on the east side with an aunt who worked nights and who wasn't always was reliable about what was in the fridge. I learned that the older one was saving up for something, though he wouldn't say what. I learned that the younger one wanted to be an engineer when he grew up and that he liked the sourdough better than the white because it tastes like it was made by someone who cares. I never pushed. I just kept the soup warm and the door unlocked. By April, they'd stopped coming. I figured they'd moved on. Kids do. Families shift. I thought about them sometimes when I made cinnamon rolls, a kind of background wondering, but life was busy and the bakery was starting to find its footing, and I let the wondering settle into the place where good memories live quiet. Cedar and honey grew. Not fast. Nothing I've ever built has grown fast, but steadily, the way a good sourdough starter deepens over years. By 2008, I'd knocked through the wall next door and added 4 tables. By 2012, I had 2 full-time employees and a catering license. By 2016, I was turning down wholesale accounts because I didn't want to compromise the bread. I was proud of what I'd built. I want to say that clearly, because what came next almost made me forget to be proud of it. My cousin came into my life in 2015. Well, she'd always been in my life in the way that family is always in your life, hovering at the edges of holidays and funerals, and the occasional uncomfortable dinner. But in 2015, she came into it. She was charming in a way I'd always found slightly exhausting, always the right thing to say, always beautifully dressed, always with a reason why your guard should be down. She told me she'd had a hard few years. She told me she wanted to rebuild. She asked if she could help out in the bakery while she got back on her feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was family. That's the thing about trust, isn't it? It doesn't feel like a door you're opening. It feels like a door that was always open. She was good at the front of house. Genuinely good. She had a warmth with customers that I'd always been slightly too preoccupied to manufacture. Within 6 months, she was managing the morning rush, handling supplier calls, suggesting small changes to the display. Reasonable things. Good ideas, even. I told myself I'd been lucky. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see because I was always in the kitchen, always in the door, always in the early morning hours that nobody else wanted, was that she'd been making other suggestions. To my accountant, to my supplier contacts, to a property developer named Mr. Vance who had an office on Stone Road and a particular interest in corner properties with heritage hardwood floors. The first sign I should have caught was a phone call from my accountant, a cautious man named Mr. Oduya, who'd done my books since 2009, asking me to confirm some changes to my banking authorization. I was in the middle of a bulk order. I said I'd call him back. I didn't call him back for 4 days. The second sign was a supplier switching my account to net 30 terms without warning. I asked my cousin Abzot. She said there'd been a cash flow issue. She'd worked it out. She hadn't wanted to worry me. I let it go. I was tired. The bakery was exhausting in the way that loving something completely is always exhausting. The third sign I didn't catch at all because it happened on paper, in offices I'd never visited, in the language of commercial real estate that I'd never learned because I'd always trusted that what was mine was mine. In the spring of 2024, I got a letter, not an email, an actual letter, formal and dense, from a legal firm I'd never heard of. It said, in language that took me 4 readings to parse, that there was a dispute regarding the commercial lease on my property, that a third party had submitted documentation asserting co-ownership of the business entity registered at my address, and that a hearing had been scheduled for the matter to be reviewed. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen and read it again, and then I called my cousin. She didn't pick up. I found out later, much later, after I'd hired my own lawyer and spent 3 months unraveling what had been done, that she had, over the course of 18 months, systematically forged my signature on a series of documents. She had used those documents to approach Mr. Vance's development company with a proposal that Cedar and Honey's lease and operating name could be acquired as part of a property deal, with her positioned as the controlling partner of the business. She had, apparently, been quite convincing. She had also been feeding information to my two longest-serving employees. Quiet misinformation, the kind that plants doubt without accusation, and two of them had already started looking for other positions. When I finally reached her, it was a brief conversation. She didn't deny it. Exactly. She said I'd never properly valued her contributions. She said she deserved more than I'd given her. She said a lot of things that I've since worked very hard to stop hearing. My lawyer told me it would take at least a year to resolve. Possibly two. The legal fees alone were going to cost me more than I'd made in my best year. The development company had documents with what appeared to be my signature, and untangling forged paperwork in Ontario commercial law is not a simple or cheap process. By September 2024, I had 3 months of operating costs left in my account. My lawyer was cautiously optimistic, which is a phrase that sounds like hope but means don't count on anything. I'd had to let go of one employee. I was back to opening the bakery alone at 4 in the morning, the way I had in the beginning, except this time without the naive certainty that everything was going to work out. I set a date, November 15th, 2024. If I hadn't found a resolution by then, I was going to close Cedar and Honey. I didn't tell many people. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want the bakery's last weeks to feel like a vigil. I just kept baking. What else do you do? November 15th came on a Friday. I got up at 3:30. I made the sourdough I'd been making since 2001, the one I'd never written down the recipe for because I'd always planned to teach it to someone someday. I made cinnamon rolls. I brewed the coffee. I unlocked the door and put out the chalkboard sign, the same one I'd had since the beginning, re-chalked hundreds of times, and I stood behind the counter and thought, this is the last time I'm going to do this. The morning rush came and went. My remaining employee, a young woman who'd been with me for 2 years, worked quietly and didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that. The afternoon regulars came in. Some of them knew something was wrong. The ones who'd been coming for 10 or 15 years always do. They didn't ask either. They just stayed longer than usual. At 2 o'clock, the bell above the door rang. 2 men walked in. They were maybe 35, early 40s. Both of them were in good coats. The kind of coats you buy when you've decided that your coat matters. One of them was carrying a document folder. The other one looked around the bakery slowly, the way people do when they're looking for something they recognize from a long time ago. And then he looked at me, and something in his face shifted. The sourdough, he said. You still make it on Tuesdays. I didn't understand what he meant. And then I did. I don't know what happens to your body in a moment like that, if it's adrenaline or recognition or just the accumulated weight of 23 years suddenly making itself known, but I had to put my hand on the counter. You came on Tuesdays, I said. February 2002, he said. My brother and I. You made us tomato soup. His name now, the one he used as an adult, was Wesley. His brother was Callum. No, wait. He introduced himself, and I'm going to get this right, he said Emmett. And his younger brother, the one who'd wanted to be an engineer, the one who'd said the sourdough tasted like someone cared, was standing right next to him. He had the same slightly forward set to his shoulders. He'd grown into them. His brother's name was Finn. Emmett said, We've been looking for you for a while. We didn't know the name of the bakery. We knew Millbrook Avenue, and we knew what the window looked like, and we knew what your sourdough smelled like, and we drove around Guelph for 2 weekends before we found it. You drove around, I said. I wasn't sure why that was the detail that was landing. We wanted to find you before. He stopped. He looked at the man with the document folder. We heard the bakery was in trouble. How did you hear that? Small city, Finn said from his brother's shoulder. He hadn't spoken yet, and his voice was different than I'd expected. Quiet, precise. We both work in Toronto, but Emmett went to U of G. He had contacts here. When he heard what was happening, he called me, and he looked at his brother. We owed you. You didn't owe me anything. You fed us for 2 winters, Emmett said. You never asked our names. You never made us feel. He stopped again, and I got the sense that he was a person who edited himself carefully, who had learned to do that. You just fed us. You made us feel like it was normal, like we were just 2 kids who came in for soup. Not like a project, Finn finished. I had to look away for a moment. out the window, at the afternoon light doing its slanted November thing. The man with the document folder, who turned out to be a lawyer named Mr. Tissot, very calm, very methodical, set a folder on my counter and opened it. He explained, in the measured way that lawyers explain things, that Emmett worked in commercial litigation and Finn was a structural engineer, and that between them they had, over the past 3 months, done the following. Retained a forensic document examiner to analyze the signatures on my cousin's forged paperwork, worked with a colleague at the law firm to build an evidentiary package for submission to the court. And this was the part that took me a moment to understand. Made a direct acquisition offer to Mr. Vance's development company that made their continued involvement in the legal dispute financially unattractive. Mr. Vance, it turned out, cared about money more than he cared about corner properties with heritage hardwood floors. His lawyers had quietly withdrawn the previous week. There's still the matter of the forged documents, Mr. Tio said. That's going to involve the court. But the immediate threat to the operating lease, that's resolved. I stared at the papers. The forensic analysis, I said. That's not cheap. Emmett looked at me in a way that I recognized from 23 years ago. Very steady, very direct. Do you still have the sourdough recipe? He said. The one you've never written down? Yes, I said. Then we're even. What I learned afterward, over the weeks that followed, as things slowly, painstakingly resolved, was that my cousin had been investigated by the Ontario Securities Commission for a separate matter before she'd ever come to work for me. There was a pattern, apparently. There were other people she'd done this to, or tried to. When the forensic evidence from my case was submitted, it became part of a broader file that had already been building. She was charged in February 2025. Multiple counts of fraud and forgery. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea, and I've been told it will take time. These things always take time. But Mr. So is confident, and I've decided that confident from a lawyer is better than cautiously optimistic. I kept Cedar and Honey open on November 15th and the 16th. And the 17th, Emmett came back the following Tuesday with his wife and their daughter, who is 4 years old and who ate an entire cinnamon roll and then asked for half of another one with the kind of confident entitlement that only very small children can pull off without anyone minding. Finn came the Tuesday after that, on his own this time, and we talked for an hour and a half at the corner table while the afternoon light did its slanted thing and the sourdough proved in the back room. He told me about the rooming house, about the aunt who worked nights, about how their mother had been sick for most of that winter, genuinely, seriously sick, and how Emmett had decided, at 13, that the way to handle it was to find the warmest place within walking distance that would let them sit down without asking too many questions. He used to say you were the safest place on Millbrook Avenue, Finn said. That's the exact phrase he used, the safest place. I didn't say anything. I went and refilled his coffee and came back and sat down. I didn't do anything special, I said. I just fed you. Any decent person would have. Sure, Finn said, in a way that wasn't unkind but was firm. But you were the one who actually did it. There's a napkin in my front pocket most days now. Old habit. I started doing it sometime in the first year when I was always wiping my hands and never had a towel close enough. But there's one napkin I keep in a specific place in the small drawer under the register, and I've kept it there since November 15th, 2024. On it, in slightly smudged ink, Emmett wrote, "We promised we'd pay you back. It only took us 20 years. Sorry about the wait." He'd remembered. All that time, he'd remembered. I think about those 2 kids sometimes when I'm doing the early morning things, the 4 a.m. things that nobody else sees, the shaping and the proofing and the quiet before the oven reaches temperature. I think about how a small thing feels different depending on which side of the counter you're standing on. From my side, in February 2002, it was soup and a cinnamon roll and a few minutes of warmth. From their side, it was something that stayed with them for 22 years and made them drive around Guelph on 2 separate weekends looking for a window they remembered from when they were kids. I used to think the bakery was what I built. The flour and the hardwood and the morning light, and I did build that. But I think sometimes the most real things you build are the ones you don't notice at the time. The small warmths, the doors you leave open, the soup you keep on because it's winter and you have it and someone might need it. Cedar and Honey is still on the corner of Millbrook and 4th. The floors still creak in the same 3 spots. The sourdough still goes up on Tuesdays. Finally, after 23 years, there are 2 copies. I have one. Finn has the other.